A Treatise of Human Nature, being an attempt to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into moral subjects, is a book by Scottish philosopher David Hume, considered by many to be Hume's most important work and one of the most influential works in the history of philosophy. Although Hume's more conservative contemporaries denounced his writings as works of skepticism and atheism, his influence is evident in the moral philosophy and economic writings of his close friend Adam Smith. Kant reported that Hume's work woke him from his dogmatic slumbers, and Jeremy Bentham remarked that reading Hume caused the scales to fall from his eyes. Charles Darwin regarded his work as a central influence on the theory of evolution. The diverse directions in which these writers took what they gleaned from reading him reflect both the richness of their sources and the wide range of his empiricism. Today, philosophers recognize Hume as a thoroughgoing exponent of philosophical naturalism, as a precursor of contemporary cognitive science, and as the inspiration for several of the most significant types of ethical theory developed in contemporary moral philosophy. A Treatise of Human Nature is considered as the most important philosophical work written in English. However, the public in Britain at the time did not agree, nor in the end did Hume himself agree, as the work was recast as three separate works later in his life, namely, an inquiry concerning human understanding, an inquiry concerning the principles of morals, and as a dissertation on the passions. The treatise is a classic statement of philosophical empiricism, skepticism, and naturalism. In the introduction, Hume presents the idea of placing all science and philosophy on a novel foundation, namely, an empirical investigation into human nature. Impressed by Isaac Newton's achievements in the physical sciences, Hume sought to introduce the same experimental method of reasoning into the study of human psychology, with the aim of discovering the extent and force of human understanding. Against the philosophical rationalists, Hume argues that the passions, rather than reason, cause human behavior. He introduces the famous problem of induction, arguing that inductive reasoning and our beliefs regarding cause and effect cannot be justified by reason. Instead, our faith in induction and causation is caused by mental habit and custom. Hume defends a sentimentalist account of morality, arguing that ethics is based on sentiment and the passions rather than reason, and famously declaring that reason is and ought only to be the slave to the passions. Hume also offers a skeptical theory of personal identity and a compatibilist account of free will. In this book, A Treatise of Human Nature, Hume attempts to explore the idea of human knowledge from a philosophical point of view, as well as to argue his opinion on what governs human behavior. The work is divided into three sections with several parts and subsections. Book 1 of The Understanding explores the idea of knowledge, claiming that all human knowledge is derived from experience, one way or the other. Book 2, titled Of the Passions, on the other hand, argues that passions and emotions, rather than pure reasoning, are the forces that govern human behavior. And the last section, Book 3, titled Of Morals, investigates the nature of morals and high ideas, arguing that they are not necessarily rational and depend on feelings and emotions more than on reasoning. In the introduction to the book, Hume says that most thinkers have been obsessed with their own work and with decrying the works of those before him. Hume's early studies of philosophical systems convinced him that philosophy was in a sorry state and in dire need of reform. When he was only 18 years old, he complained in a letter that anyone familiar with philosophy realizes that it is embroiled in endless disputes. The ancient philosophers on whom he had been concentrating replicated the errors their natural philosophers made. They advanced theories that were entirely hypothetical, depending more upon invention than experience. He objects that they consulted their imagination in constructing their views about virtue and happiness without regarding human nature, upon which every moral conclusion must depend. The youthful Hume resolved to avoid these mistakes in his own work by making human nature his principal study and the source from which he would derive every truth. Even at this early stage, the roots of Hume's mature approach to the reform of philosophy are evident. He was convinced that the only way to improve philosophy was to make the investigation of the human nature central and empirical. The problem with ancient philosophy was its reliance on hypotheses, claims based on speculation and invention rather than experience and observation. By the time Hume began to write the treatise 3 years later, he had immersed himself in the works of the modern philosophers but found them disturbing, not least because they made the same mistakes the ancients did while professing to avoid them. Why, Hume asks, haven't philosophers been able to make the spectacular progress in understanding human nature that natural philosophers, whom we now call scientists, have recently achieved in the physical sciences? His answer is that while scientists have cured themselves of their quote, passion for hypotheses and systems, unquote, philosophers haven't yet purged themselves of this temptation. Their theories were too speculative, relied on a priori assumptions, and paid too little attention to what human nature is actually like. Instead of helping us understand ourselves, modern philosophers were mired in interminable disputes. To make progress, Hume maintains, we need to reject every system, however subtle or ingenious, which is not founded on fact and observation. These systems, covering a wide range of entrenched and influential metaphysical and theological views, purport to have discovered principles that give us a deeper and more certain knowledge of ultimate reality. But Hume argues that in attempting to go beyond anything we can possibly experience, these metaphysical theories try to penetrate into subjects utterly inaccessible to the understanding, which makes their claims to have found the ultimate principles of human nature not just false but unintelligible. These airy sciences, he calls them, have only the air of science. Worse still, these metaphysical systems are smokescreens for populist superstitions that attempt to overwhelm us with religious fears and prejudices. Hume has in mind a variety of doctrines that need metaphysical cover to look respectable: arguments for the existence of God, the immortality of the soul, and the nature of God's particular providence. Metaphysics aids and abets these and other superstitious doctrines. But he insists that because these metaphysical and theological systems are objectionable, it doesn't mean we should give up doing philosophy. Instead, we need to appreciate the necessity of carrying the war into the most secret recesses of the enemy. The only way to resist the allure of these pseudosciences is to engage with them, countering their abstruse metaphysical jargon with accurate and just reasoning. Hume proposes a complete system of the sciences built on a foundation entirely new. The new foundation is the scientific study of human nature. He argues that all the sciences have some relation to human nature, even mathematics, natural philosophy, and natural religion. They are all human activities. So, what we are able to accomplish in them depends on understanding what kinds of questions we are able to handle and what sorts we must leave alone. If we have a better grasp of the scope and limits of our understanding, the nature of our ideas, and the operations we perform in reasoning about them, there is no telling what improvements we might make in these sciences. We should expect even more improvement in the sciences that are more closely connected to the study of human nature, which are logic, morals, criticism, and politics. Many long standing philosophical debates are about the nature of our ideas, so getting clear about their content should help us cut through these endless disputes. As the science of human nature is the only solid foundation for the other sciences, the only solid foundation we can give to this science itself must be laid on experience and observation, he says. Although Hume does not mention him by name, Newton is a zero. He accepts the Newtonian maxim, hypothesis non fingo. Roughly, I do not do hypotheses. Any laws we discover must be established by observation and experiment. Hume is proposing an empiricist alternative to traditional a priori metaphysics. His empiricism is naturalistic in that it refuses to countenance any appeal to the supernatural in the explanation of human nature. As a naturalist, he aims to account for the way our minds work in a manner that is consistent with the Newtonian picture of the world. He says, here then is the only expedient from which we can hope for success in our philosophical researches, to leave the tedious lingering method which we have hitherto followed, and instead of taking now and then a castle or a village on the frontier, to march up directly to the capital or center of these sciences, to human nature itself, which being once masters of, we may everywhere else hope for an easy victory. From this station, we may extend our conquests over all those sciences which more intimately concern human life, and may afterwards proceed at leisure to discover more fully those which are the objects of poor curiosity. There is no question of importance whose decision is not comprised in the science of man, and there is none which can be decided with any certainty before we become acquainted with that science. He says that although philosophy, as an empirical enterprise, is itself bound by experience, this is not a defect in the science of human nature. The same is true for all the sciences. None of them can go beyond experience or establish any principles which are not founded on that authority. He says at the end of the introduction to this book, if this impossibility of explaining ultimate principles should be esteemed a defect in the science of man, I will venture to affirm that it is a defect common to it with all the sciences and all the arts in which we can employ ourselves, whether they be such as are cultivated in the schools of the philosophers or practiced in the shops of the meanest artisans. None of them can go beyond experience or establish any principles which are not founded on that authority. Moral philosophy has, indeed, this peculiar disadvantage which is not found in that in collecting its experiments, it cannot make them purposely, with premeditation, and after such a manner as to satisfy itself concerning every particular difficulty which may be. When I am at a loss to know the effects of one body upon another in any situation, I need only put them in that situation and observe what results from it. But should I endeavor to clear up after the same manner any doubt in moral philosophy by placing myself in the same case with that which I consider, it is evident this reflection and premeditation would so disturb the operation of my natural principles as must render it impossible to form any just conclusion from the phenomenon. We must therefore glean up our experiments in this science from a cautious observation of human life, and take them as they appear in the common course of the world by men's behavior in company, and in affairs and in their pleasures. Where experiments of this kind are judiciously collected and compared, we may hope to establish on them a science which will not be inferior in certainty, and will be much superior in utility to any other of human comprehension.